I never wanted the graveyard shift at Eastern State. Nobody does. But we all need money, don't we? And night guard pays double what day security makes. Double pay for what's essentially a glorified babysitting job, watching over a crumbling prison that's been closed since 1971. A historic landmark, a tourist attraction, a hulking Gothic monstrosity that takes up entire city blocks in the Fairmount section of Philadelphia. That's what I told myself when I signed the contract. The day supervisor, a sunburned man named Garvey, with nicotine-stained fingers and perpetually watery eyes, handed me the keys with a humorless smile. "Orientation starts at sundown," he said. "Rodriguez will walk you through everything." "The website said orientation was at 4 p.m., I replied, consulting my phone to confirm. Garvey's smile tightened. "That's the tourist-friendly version. Night watch orientation is different. Be at cell block 7 by sundown or don't bother coming back tomorrow." I spent the hours between my morning interview and sunset, wandering around Eastern State as a regular visitor, trying to get a feel for the place in daylight. The prison is a strange architectural marvel, a massive stone fortress with walls 30 feet high and 12 feet thick, designed to intimidate from the outside and isolate from within. Built in 1829, it pioneered the separate system of incarceration, where prisoners were kept in complete solitude, supposedly to reflect on their crimes, without the corrupting influence of other inmates. In practice, it drove men insane. Each cell was an isolation chamber with only a single skylight, the Eye of God, providing illumination. Prisoners wore hoods when moved between locations, so they couldn't see or be seen by others. Some cells connected to private exercise yards, where inmates could spend exactly 1 hour daily, alone under the open sky but surrounded by towering walls. No human contact for years, or even decades. As I wandered through the radiating cell blocks, past peeling paint and rusted beds, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eastern State wasn't just preserving history. It was preserving something else. Something in the walls themselves, in the very architecture of isolation and punishment. The guided tour mentioned Al Capone's luxurious cell, the 1945 escape tunnel, and the prison's eventual closure due to overcrowding and deteriorating conditions. The guide casually referenced ghost stories and the prison's popularity with paranormal investigators, all delivered with the rehearsed skepticism of someone who needed their paycheck more than they needed to share their actual experiences. What the tour didn't mention was why the night watch paid so well, or why 3 guards had quit in the past month alone. As sunset approached, I made my way to cell block 7 as instructed. This section wasn't on the tourist route. It had been deemed structurally unsound in the 1990s and closed off for preservation purposes. The cell block door was secured with both an antique iron lock and a modern electronic keypad. I used the keys and code Garvey had provided, stepping into darkness as the heavy door swung shut behind me with the decisive thud of finality. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing uncomfortably down the corridor. "Rodriguez?" Motion-activated lights flickered on sequentially down the cell block, illuminating a massive central corridor flanked by 3 tiers of cells stretching upward into shadow. At the far end, a figure sat at a small desk, head bent over paperwork. "You're early," Rodriguez said without looking up. "Good. We've got a lot to cover before 2. As I approached, I noted that Rodriguez was older than I expected, maybe late 50s, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair and skin the color of well-oiled walnut. His uniform was impeccable, nameplate gleaming, shoes polished to a mirror shine. Military background, I guessed. His eyes, when he finally looked up, were dark and unreadable. 2? I asked. My shift runs midnight to 8. Officially, yes. Rodriguez gestured to a chair across from him. But the real work starts at 2. That's when the old protocols kick in. He slid a leather-bound book across the desk. Not some modern employee handbook, but something that looked like it belonged in a museum. The cover was faded red leather, the title embossed in flaking gold leaf. Eastern State Penitentiary, Night Watch Protocols. Everything you need to know is in here, Rodriguez said. Read it carefully, memorize it. Your life depends on following these rules to the letter. I laughed nervously. My life? Come on, what's really going on here? Is this some kind of hazing ritual for new guards? Rodriguez didn't smile. Eastern State held approximately 75,000 inmates between 1829 and 1971. Official records report 1,200 deaths within these walls. Both numbers are lies. He tapped the book with one perfectly manicured finger. The real numbers are in here, along with the rules that keep those numbers from growing. Something in his tone silenced my skepticism. I opened the book to the first page, where a handwritten note stated simply, Eastern State Penitentiary stands at the crossroads of the living and the dead. Those who maintain the night watch must observe the following protocols between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. without exception or deviation. Failure to comply will result in consequences beyond conventional understanding. What followed was a list of rules that made my blood run cold. Eastern State Penitentiary Night Watch Protocol. Rule 1. Complete rounds of all accessible cell blocks before 1:45 a.m. After 2 a.m., remain in the guard station in cell block 5 until 5 a.m., unless responding to a code black situation. Rule 2. At precisely 2 a.m., ring the old warden's bell 3 times. No more, no less. This announces your authority to the residents. Rule 3. The surveillance system will display anomalies after 2 a.m. If humanoid figures appear on camera in areas where no guard is present, log the location but do not investigate until after 5 a.m. Rule 4. If you hear your name called, respond only if you can see the speaker directly. Voices from around corners, from inside cells, or from the old administrative block should be ignored regardless of their familiarity or urgency. Rule 5. Cell doors that were closed during evening inspection must remain closed. If any cell doors found open during night rounds, close and lock it immediately. Do not look inside the cell while doing so. Rule 6. The elevator in Block 14 is decommissioned and does not function. If you hear the elevator operating or see its indicator lights activated, leave the block immediately and lock the access door behind you. Rule 7. Inmates were issued 1 blanket each. If you observe multiple blankets in a cell, alert the day supervisor immediately following your shift. Do not attempt to remove the excess blankets yourself. Rule 8. Religious items left by visitors must remain where they were placed. This includes crucifixes, rosaries, medallions, written prayers, or candles. Removing these items constitutes a code black. Rule 9. If lights flicker in sequence down a cell block, creating a chasing effect exit, that block immediately and do not return until after 5 a.m. Rule 10. The sounds of riot or mass movement may occasionally be heard. Unless accompanied by visual confirmation of actual intruders, these are residual phenomena and should be logged, but not responded to. Rule 11. Some cells may appear occupied when all records indicate they should be empty. Do not acknowledge or interact with apparent occupants. They are not your concern and are subject to different regulations. Rule 12. If you encounter a fellow guard who is not scheduled for that night, verify their identity by asking for the current month's password. If they cannot provide it or give an incorrect response, maintain distance and contact external emergency services using the dedicated line. Rule 13, Death Row, Block 15, remains strictly off limits at all times. The door should be secured with both the iron lock and the modern electronic system. If you find this door unlocked or open, do not attempt to secure it. Leave the facility immediately. Contact the emergency number on your ID badge, and do not return until cleared by administrative services. I looked up from the list, a chill running down my spine despite the summer heat that lingered in the old stone building. "What the fuck is going on here?" I said, though something in Rodriguez's expression told me it wasn't. "Eastern State operated for 142 years, he replied, his voice matter of fact. Nearly a century and a half of pain, isolation, desperation, and death concentrated in one location. You think all that just evaporates when they stop using the building as a prison?" He leaned forward. "Energy doesn't disappear. It transforms." I flipped through more pages of the protocol book, finding detailed maps of the facility with certain areas marked in red ink, along with additional instructions for specific scenarios called Code Black situations. The handwriting changed every few pages, suggesting the book had been maintained by different guards over many years. So what exactly am I dealing with here? Ghosts. Rodriguez considered this. That word oversimplifies it. What exists in Eastern State after 2 a.m. isn't just dead inmates lingering behind. It's impressions. Moments of extreme emotion burned into the stone itself. Pain made manifest. He paused. And sometimes, things that were never human to begin with, that found a home here because of what this place represents. You can't seriously expect me to believe. What you believe is irrelevant, Rodriguez cut in sharply. People have died ignoring these protocols. Good people. Smart people who thought they knew better. He tapped the book again. Every rule in here is written in blood. Every single one exists because someone paid the price for not knowing it. The conviction in his voice was unnerving. Either this was an elaborate prank on the new guy, or Rodriguez genuinely believed what he was saying. Either way, I needed this job too badly to walk away now. "What's with the 2 a.m. timing?" I asked, deciding to play along. "Why not midnight? That's when spooky stuff is supposed to happen, right?" 3 a.m. is traditionally considered the witching hour, or devil's hour in Western folklore, Rodriguez replied, his tone academic. But Eastern State operates on corrections time, 1 hour earlier. Everything that happens in prison happens on prison schedule, even the supernatural. He stood abruptly, checking his immaculate wristwatch. "It's 8:42 p.m. We need to complete full rounds before lockdown at 10 p.m. You need to know every inch of this place before midnight, and I need to be gone before 2 a.m. You're not staying?" A shadow passed over Rodriguez's face. Nobody works past 2 a.m. until they've completed at least 3 months on night watch. I'll be back at 5:30 to check on you and help with the morning protocols. He handed me a radio, flashlight, and a set of keys on a retractable cord. "Keep these on you at all times. The radio works for guard-to-guard communication and outside lines, but only before 2 a.m. After that, it's just static." As we began our walkthrough of the massive prison complex, Rodriguez pointed out features not mentioned in the tourist brochures. Hidden alcoves where inmates had committed suicide, cells where particularly violent deaths had occurred, corners where shadows seemed to linger unnaturally, even under direct light. Block 12 was where they housed the most dangerous inmates before death row was established, he explained as we passed a particularly oppressive corridor. The energy there is heavy. Avoid it after midnight if possible. And if it's not possible, then keep moving. Don't linger. Don't respond to anything you hear. He glanced at me, especially if it sounds like someone you know. By the time we completed our rounds, my initial skepticism had given way to a growing unease. The prison at night was an entirely different entity than it had been during my daytime tour. Shadows pooled in corners where they had no business gathering. Sounds carried strangely, sometimes seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And though I told myself it was just the ancient ventilation system, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was breathing in the darkness just beyond our flashlight beams. At 10 p.m., Rodriguez led me to the guard station in cell block 5, a small room enclosed in bulletproof glass that provided views down the central corridor in both directions. Inside were 2 chairs, a desk with modern surveillance monitors, a small refrigerator, a microwave, and an antique brass bell mounted on the wall. "This is where you'll spend most of your shift," he said. "The monitors cover about 80% of the complex. The remaining areas have camera blind spots for various reasons: structural limitations, historical preservation requirements, or other concerns." The pause before "other concerns" was barely perceptible. "And the bell?" I asked, eyeing the tarnished brass fixture. "The warden's bell, Rule 2, ring it 3 times at exactly 2 a.m. Rodriguez checked his watch again. "I need to brief you on emergency protocols, and then get out of here." For the next hour, he walked me through various scenarios: power failures, actual intruders versus residual phenomena, and the ominous-sounding code black situations that required specific containment procedures. By the time midnight rolled around, my head was spinning with information, rules, and warnings. "Final rounds," Rodriguez announced, standing. "Then you're on your own." We made one last circuit of the accessible areas, checking door locks and scanning dark corners. Everything was quiet, unnaturally so. Even the constant ambient noise of Philadelphia outside seemed muted within the eastern state's massive walls. "One last thing," Rodriguez said, as we returned to the guard station. "The administrative office down the hall has a cot if you need to rest. Rule 1 says stay in the guard station between 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock, but there's a 90-second window where you can safely walk from here to the office. Any longer, and you're in violation." "What happens if I violate the rules?" I asked. Rodriguez's expression remained carefully neutral. "Eastern State rewards compliance and punishes deviation. That's been its purpose since 1829. He extended his hand. "Good luck on your first night, Mr. Mercer. I'll see you at 5:30. As the massive iron door clanged shut behind him, I was left alone in the oppressive silence of America's most famous abandoned prison, with nothing but a mysterious rule book and the growing conviction that I had made a terrible mistake. The first hour passed without incident. I monitored the surveillance feeds, completed the required paperwork, and tried to ignore the oppressive silence that seemed to press against my eardrums like a physical force. Eastern State at night was a labyrinth of shadows, the decaying cell blocks stretching outward from the central hub like the spokes of a diseased wheel. At 1:15 a.m., I began my final rounds before the mysterious 2 a.m. deadline. The protocol book was explicit. All accessible areas needed to be checked before 1:45, with enough time to return to the guard station before the witching hour. I moved methodically through each cell block, sweeping my flashlight across empty cells with their rusted bed frames and peeling paint. Decades of tours had worn paths in the dust, but some cells remained untouched, preserved in their state of abandonment like morbid time capsules. In cell block 3, I found an open cell door that should have been closed. Rule 5 flashed in my mind: close and lock it immediately, without looking inside. I approached cautiously, keeping my gaze fixed on the corridor ahead as I pushed the heavy iron door shut. The lock engaged with a satisfying click, but as I turned to continue my rounds, I heard a soft scraping sound from inside the newly locked cell. Rule 5 hadn't specified what to do if I heard something after closing the door. Log it? Ignore it? I decided on the latter, picking up my pace slightly as I moved down the corridor. Cell block 7, the one where I'd met Rodriguez earlier, was particularly unsettling. The air felt thicker somehow, resistant to my passage, as if the space itself objected to my presence. My flashlight beam seemed to penetrate less deeply here, the darkness swallowing the light more efficiently than it should have. As I neared the end of the block, I heard it. A voice, barely above a whisper, calling from inside one of the cells. "Hey, new guy, over here." I froze, remembering Rule 4, respond only if you can see the speaker directly. I swept my flashlight toward the voice, illuminating an empty cell with its door securely locked. "Come on, man, I know you can hear me," the voice continued, sounding remarkably like my brother Michael. "I need help. Please." A chill ran down my spine. My brother lived in Oregon. He'd never been to Philadelphia, let alone Eastern State Penitentiary. Yet the voice was unmistakably his, the same timbre, the same slight rasp from years of smoking. "Mercer, please, it's me. I'm trapped in here." I kept walking, my heart pounding. How did it know my name? Rodriguez had used it earlier when saying goodbye, but we'd been alone in the guard station. "They're going to kill me if you don't help." The scream echoed down the corridor, my brother's voice distorted with terror and rage. I broke into a jog, eager to escape cell block 7 and its impossibilities. Back in the relative safety of the central hub, I checked my watch. 1:37 a.m. Still time to complete my rounds and return to the guard station before 2 o'clock. I tried to rationalize what I'd heard. An acoustic trick, my mind playing games in the isolated environment. Maybe even another guard playing a prank. None of the explanations felt convincing. Cell block 10 was next on my route, a shorter wing with cells that had been partially restored for historical tours. As I swept my flashlight across the first row of cells, the beam caught something that made me freeze. A face, pressed against the bars of a cell that should have been empty. It was there for just a fraction of a second. Gaunt, pale, with hollow eyes that reflected my flashlight like an animal's. When I steadied the beam for a better look, the cell was empty. Rule 11. Some cells may appear occupied when all records indicate they should be empty. Do not acknowledge or interact with apparent occupants. I continued my patrol with a growing sense of urgency, checking my watch compulsively as I completed the final accessible areas. At 1:43 a.m., I turned back toward the guard station, picking up my pace without quite breaking into a run. As I passed through cell block 4 on my return route, the lights began to flicker, not random power fluctuations, but a deliberate sequential pattern that traveled down the corridor ahead of me like a wave. Rule 9. If lights flicker in sequence down a cell block, creating that chasing effect, exit that block immediately. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted for the nearest exit, the lights chasing me as I ran. Each bulb came to life as I passed under it, then extinguished behind me, as if something was pursuing me through the electrical system itself. I burst through the exit door into the central hub at 1:52 a.m., gasping for breath. The guard station was visible across the open space, its lights a beacon of safety in the increasingly hostile environment. I jogged the remaining distance and locked myself inside with 5 minutes to spare before 2 a.m. The surveillance monitors showed nothing unusual. Empty corridors, locked cells, the abandoned exercise yards with their overgrown patches of weeds pushing through cracked concrete. Nothing to explain the voice, the face, or the pursuing lights. At exactly 1:59 a.m., I checked that the door to the guard station was securely locked, then positioned myself by the warden's bell as instructed. The brass fixture was tarnished with age, the rope pull frayed at the edges as if it had been handled by countless hands over the decades. As my watch ticked over to 2 a.m., I pulled the rope 3 times in succession. The bell's tone was deeper than I'd expected, resonating through the guard station and beyond, with a sound that seemed to penetrate stone and flesh alike. 1, 2, 3. The moment the third toll faded, every light in the prison complex flickered simultaneously. The surveillance monitors went black for precisely 3 seconds, then returned to normal, except nothing was normal anymore. On camera 4, covering cell block 7, a figure stood in the middle of the corridor, perfectly still and facing the camera. It appeared to be wearing the striped uniform of a 19th century inmate, though the image was too grainy to make out details of its face. On camera 6, cell block 10, 3 figures moved slowly from cell to cell, checking inside each one as if conducting their own patrol. They moved with a fluid synchronicity that was distinctly inhuman. On camera 9, the administrative block showed lights on in offices that should have been empty, silhouettes moving behind frosted glass doors, bearing the names of wardens who had died decades ago. Rule 3. If humanoid figures appear on camera in areas where no guard is present, log the location, but do not investigate until after 5 a.m. With shaking hands, I opened the logbook and began recording what I was seeing, trying to maintain the clinical detachment that Rodriguez had demonstrated. Camera 4, cell block 7, single humanoid figure, stationary, apparent historical inmate uniform. Camera 6, cell block 10, multiple humanoid figures, mobile, conducting cell checks. As I wrote, a new movement caught my eye on camera 2, which monitored the corridor directly outside the guard station. A figure was approaching, not one of the strange, indistinct shapes from the other cameras, but a clearly visible man in a modern security uniform identical to mine. Rule 12. If you encounter a fellow guard who is not scheduled for that night, verify their identity. I watched as the figure stopped outside the guard station door and raised its hand to knock. 3 sharp raps echoed through the small room, impossibly loud in the silence. "Hello?" called a friendly, normal-sounding voice. "You in there, new guy?" "It's Williams from day shift. Forgot my medication in my locker and had to come back for it." I approached the door cautiously, keeping the protocol book in hand. Through the glass, the man looked completely ordinary, mid-30s, slightly overweight, with a regulation haircut and a nameplate that did indeed read Williams. "What's the password?" I called through the door, remembering Rule 12's verification procedure. Williams looked confused. "Password? Oh, you mean the monthly code. It's Liberty Bell, right?" I hesitated. Rodriguez hadn't actually told me the current month's password. Was Liberty Bell correct? It sounded plausible for a Philadelphia institution. As I considered what to do, I noticed something odd about Williams. Although he was standing directly under one of the corridor lights, he cast no shadow on the floor beneath him. "Let me call Rodriguez to confirm," I said, reaching for the radio. Williams's expression changed subtly. "No need for that. I'm already here, aren't I? Just open up and I'll be out of your way in a minute." I stepped back from the door. "I'm sorry, but protocol says I need to verify." The friendly demeanor vanished instantly. Williams's face contorted into a mask of rage, his features somehow shifting beneath his skin like clay being remolded by invisible hands. "Open this door!" he screamed, his voice no longer human, but a chorus of overlapping shrieks. He slammed both fists against the glass with enough force that it should have shattered, though the bulletproof barrier held. I backed away, heart pounding, as Williams's uniform began to darken with spreading stains that looked horribly like fresh blood. His eyes had changed too, now solid black, reflecting nothing. "You will let me in." The thing wearing Williams's face howled, its mouth stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows of teeth like broken glass. "The warden demands it." I grabbed the radio with trembling hands, but as Rodriguez had warned, it produced nothing but static after 2 a.m. The creature outside continued to pound on the door, each impact accompanied by the sound of breaking bones, though its ruined hands somehow reformed after each blow. On the surveillance monitors, I could see the other entities had stopped their activities and turned toward the cameras, as if watching the confrontation with interest. The figure in cell block 7 had moved closer to its camera, its features now more visible. It had no face at all, just smooth, blank skin stretched over a skull-like shape. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the Williams thing stopped its assault. It pressed its face close to the glass, the features still shifting and reforming like wax under heat. 3 hours, it said, its voice now a harmonious blend of hundreds of different tones, speaking in perfect unison. "We have 3 hours until dawn. The door won't hold forever." Then it turned and walked away, its gait unnaturally smooth, as if its feet weren't quite touching the ground. On the monitors, I watched it join the faceless figure in cell block 7, the two entities standing together for a moment, before the Williams thing dissolved into a dark mist that seeped into the stones of the floor. The faceless figure remained, staring directly at the camera. Slowly, deliberately, it raised one hand and pointed at me. Or rather, pointed at camera 2, at the guard station where I watched. Then it too began to change, its form elongating and twisting until it resembled nothing human, before it slithered into the shadows between cells and vanished from view. I spent the next hour documenting everything in meticulous detail, partly because the protocol demanded it, and partly to keep myself sane. The surveillance monitors continued to show glimpses of impossible things, inmates from different eras moving through the corridors, some in chains, others performing work duties that had ceased decades ago. Occasionally, something far less human would cross the camera's field of view, writhing shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly, or tall, thin figures that seemed composed more of absence than presence. At exactly 3:13 a.m., every monitor went black simultaneously. When they returned 30 seconds later, all the entities were gone. The prison appeared empty once more, though somehow more watchful, as if the building itself had awakened and turned its attention toward the guard station. In the sudden quiet, I became aware of a soft, persistent sound coming from the old administrative block. I adjusted camera 9, zooming in on the warden's former office. The elevator indicator light was on, showing movement between floors. Rule 6. The elevator in Block 14 is decommissioned and does not function. If you hear the elevator operating or see its indicator lights activated, leave the block immediately. But I wasn't in Block 14. I was safely in the guard station. The rule didn't specify what to do if I observed the elevator from the cameras. Should I log it? Ignore it? As I debated my next action, the elevator indicator stopped at the top floor. The doors must have opened because a moment later, a procession of figures emerged into the corridor. Men in vintage guard uniforms escorting a prisoner in full restraints toward what I knew from the daytime tour had once been the warden's office. The prisoner's head was covered with a hood, but something about their movements suggested they were struggling against the guards, who handled their charge with bureaucratic brutality. As they reached the office door, one guard removed the hood. I dropped my pen in shock. The prisoner was me. I stared at the monitor, unable to process what I was seeing. The prisoner, my doppelganger, was being forced into the warden's office by guards in uniforms that hadn't been used since the 1940s. Despite the distance and poor camera quality, I could clearly see my own face contorted in terror, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. The door closed behind them, cutting off my view of whatever was happening inside. I sat frozen, pen still on the floor where I'd dropped it, my mind cycling through possible explanations. Hallucination, camera malfunction, elaborate prank. None felt convincing. At 3:33 a.m., the office door opened again. The guards emerged without the prisoner, without me. They walked with the synchronized precision I'd observed in the other entities, returning to the elevator and disappearing inside. The indicator light tracked their descent to the basement level, then went dark. I retrieved my pen with shaking hands and documented the incident in the logbook, trying to maintain clinical detachment despite my racing heart. As I wrote, I became aware of a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere nearby. At first I thought it was coming through the surveillance system, but the sound persisted even when I muted the monitors. It was coming from inside the guard station itself. I followed the sound to the back wall of the guard station, where a small vent connected to the prison's ancient ventilation system. The tapping was coming from inside, as if someone or something was trying to communicate. Three taps, the same number as the bell rings, required at 2 a.m. Was there a connection? As if responding to my thought, the tapping pattern changed. 5 taps in quick succession. Then it began again, but with a clear pattern now. A pattern, a message. I checked my watch, 3:53 a.m. The numbers didn't match. What was the significance of 3-5-3? The protocol book lay open on the desk where I'd left it. I flipped through looking for any mention of communication patterns or codes, finding nothing relevant until I reached a section titled Emergency Provisions. There, a small note in the margin caught my eye. 353, Block 15 breach. Block 15, death row. Rule 13, strictly off limits at all times. I quickly switched the surveillance monitor to camera 15, which should have shown the entrance to the death row block. The screen remained black. According to the system status, camera 15 was offline. The tapping from the vent grew more insistent. I checked the other cameras, looking for any sign of disturbance near death row. Camera 14, which monitored the corridor leading to Block 15, showed the massive door that separated death row from the rest of the prison. It was open. Just a few inches, but unmistakably ajar. Rule 13 was explicit. If you find this door unlocked or open, do not attempt to secure it. Leave the facility immediately, contact the emergency number, and do not return until cleared. I reached for my radio before remembering it wouldn't work until after 5 a.m. My cell phone, stashed in my locker as per regulations, would be similarly useless given the prison's thick stone walls and the inexplicable electronics interference after 2 a.m. The protocol book offered no guidance for this specific scenario. Unable to leave due to the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. restriction, but also facing a Block 15 breach. Which rule took precedence? As I debated my limited options, the lights throughout the prison flickered. Not in sequence this time, but all at once. A complex pattern like Morse code that I couldn't decipher. On the monitors, I saw movement in multiple blocks simultaneously. The entities had returned, but now they moved with purpose, all heading in the same direction, toward Block 15. Some walked calmly, others ran with desperate urgency, while a few moved in ways that defied anatomical possibilities, flowing like liquid or scuttling on too many limbs. The tapping from the vent had stopped, replaced by a low, persistent humming that made my teeth ache and my vision blur around the edges. I made a decision. Rule 1 confined me to the guard station, but Rule 13 specified leaving the facility entirely. Since I couldn't follow both, I would prioritize the one that seemed most urgent, the Block 15 breach. But first, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I pulled out the facility map included in the protocol book, studying the layout of Block 15 and its relation to the rest of the prison. Death Row was deliberately isolated, accessible only through a single, heavily secured entrance. According to the historical notes, it had housed Eastern State's most dangerous inmates and had been the site of multiple executions before Pennsylvania officially ended the death penalty. The notes also mentioned something odd. Block 15 had been built over the remains of an earlier structure, some kind of underground chamber that predated the prison itself. The chamber had been discovered during the expansion work in 1913 and subsequently sealed off after several unexplained incidents among the construction crew. The warden at the time had made the peculiar decision to build Death Row directly above this chamber, connecting the two spaces with a shaft that the official records described as a ventilation improvement. A ventilation shaft, like the one currently emitting that bone-rattling hum in the guard station. I checked my watch again. 4:07 a.m. Less than an hour until the 5 a.m. threshold, when the rules stated the night watch protocols would end. If I could just wait it out. A new sound cut through the humming, a distant metallic screech like massive hinges protesting movement after decades of stillness. On camera 14, I watched in horror as the door to Block 15 swung fully open of its own accord. A darkness deeper than mere absence of light spilled from the opening, flowing across the threshold like liquid shadow. The entities throughout the prison had reached the corridor, leading to Death Row. They formed a bizarre procession, inmates from different eras, walking alongside guards and figures in civilian clothing I assumed were former visitors or staff. At the front of this procession was the faceless entity from Cell Block 7, now wearing what appeared to be a warden's uniform from the early 1900s. They stopped at the threshold where darkness spilled from Block 15. The faceless warden raised its hands, and the assembled entities dropped to their knees in unison, heads bowed in what looked disturbingly like worship. From within Block 15, something moved. The camera quality made it difficult to discern details, but I could see a massive form taking shape within the darkness, taller than a man, with proportions that seemed wrong in fundamental ways. It remained mostly within the shadows, but occasionally I caught glimpses of what might have been limbs, or possibly tentacles, moving with deliberate, almost ritualistic slowness. The faceless warden stepped forward, directly addressing the thing in the darkness. Though I couldn't hear the words, I could see its blank face rippling as if forming speech. The darkness responded by extending something toward the warden, a limb, a tendril, a hand, I couldn't tell, and the warden accepted whatever was offered with a deep bow. Then the warden turned, facing directly toward camera 14, though it had no eyes to see with. It raised what it had been given, a key, ancient and ornate, that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the corridor's light. With deliberate precision, the faceless warden pointed first at the key, then directly at the camera, then made a turning motion as if unlocking the door. The message couldn't have been clearer. It wanted me to use that key. But on what? There was no keyhole in the guard station, and the protocol book mentioned nothing about a key associated with Block 15. The procession of entities began to move again, flowing back into the main prison complex like a reversal of their earlier convergence. The faceless warden, however, remained at the threshold, still pointing at the camera, still making that turning gesture. At exactly 4:15 a.m., every single light in Eastern State Penitentiary went out simultaneously. The emergency backup power kicked in seconds later, bathing the guard station in dim red light, but the surveillance monitors remained dark. I was effectively blind to whatever was happening beyond my small, supposedly safe enclosure. In the new silence, even the humming from the vent had stopped. I heard footsteps approaching the guard station door. Slow, measured steps that echoed on the stone floor. They stopped just outside, followed by 3 distinct knocks. "Mr. Mercer," called a voice I recognized as Rodriguez's. "It's 4:16. I came back early to check on you. Let me in. Rule 12. If you encounter a fellow guard, verify their identity by asking for the current month's password." "What's the password?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. A pause. "The password is Cornerstone. Now let me in. Something's wrong with Block 15. I can see the doors open from here." The password sounded plausible. Cornerstone had historical significance for Eastern State, which had been designed by architect John Haviland based on the concept of separate confinement radiating from a central surveillance hub. But Rodriguez had never actually told me the password, and his early return seemed suspicious, given his insistence on the 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. isolation period. "I need to see your face first," I said, moving closer to the door but not unlocking it. Rodriguez stepped into view outside the glass, looking exactly as he had earlier. Impeccable uniform, close-cropped salt and pepper hair, expression serious but composed. "We don't have time for this, Mercer. The Block 15 situation is a code black. We need to enact containment protocols immediately." He held up a key identical to the one I'd seen the faceless warden holding on the surveillance feed before the cameras went dark. "Where did you get that?" I asked, my hand frozen on the door lock. "It's the master key," Rodriguez replied impatiently. "Standard issue for supervisors. Now open up." Something wasn't right. If this was really Rodriguez, why would he risk entering the prison between 2 and 5 a.m.? Why hadn't he called first? And how had he known about the Block 15 door being open when camera 15 was offline? I stepped back from the door. "I'm going to wait until 5 a.m. as per protocol." Rodriguez's expression darkened. That's not an option. The Block 15 breach supersedes all other protocols. You have a duty to assist in containment. Rule 13 says not to attempt to secure the door, to leave the facility and call the emergency number. That's if you're alone, Rodriguez snapped, his patience visibly wearing thin. With 2 guards, we can initiate the containment sequence. It's in the advanced protocols, Section 7. I'd seen no Section 7 in the protocol book, but it was possible there were additional rules for experienced guards that I hadn't been shown yet. Let me check the book, I said, turning toward the desk where I'd left it open. The protocol book was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper with one sentence written in a flowing, antique script that I didn't recognize. The key fits the lock beneath the warden's bell. I looked up sharply. Rodriguez was still outside the door, but something had changed. His shadow on the floor behind him was wrong, too large, too shapeless, with protrusions that didn't match his human silhouette. "Last chance, Mercer," he said, his voice retaining its human quality, though his shadow continued to writhe and expand behind him. "Open the door, or face the consequences of failing your duty." My eyes darted to the warden's bell on the wall, the one I'd rung at 2 a.m. Beneath it, partially hidden by the mounting bracket, was a small brass plate I hadn't noticed before. I moved closer, examining it in the dim red emergency lighting. It was a keyhole cover, a keyhole that would perfectly fit the antique key Rodriguez, or whatever was wearing his face, held outside the door. "What's behind Block 15? I asked, stalling for time as I tried to process this new information. "What's in the chamber beneath it?" Rodriguez's face remained perfectly composed, but his shadow reared up behind him like a cobra preparing to strike. "Open this door, and I'll show you." "I don't think you're Rodriguez," I said, backing away from both the door and the keyhole beneath the bell. "I don't think you've ever been Rodriguez." The thing outside smiled, a perfect imitation of a human expression that nonetheless sent ice through my veins. "Very good, Mr. Mercer. You're more perceptive than most new hires." The smile widened beyond what a human jaw should allow. "But it doesn't matter what you've figured out. The door to Block 15 is open. The way is prepared. All that remains is for you to complete the sequence." "What sequence?" "Ring the bell. Turn the key. Open the way." Its voice had begun to change, Rodriguez's familiar tones overlaid with something ancient and hungry. "That's all you need to do." "And if I refuse?" The smile expanded further, consuming too much of its face. "Then we'll find someone else. We always do. But it would be messier, more painful for everyone involved." As if to emphasize this point, the entity's shadow detached from its feet, sliding under the door and into the guard station. The temperature plummeted as the living darkness pooled on the floor, then began climbing the walls like sentient oil. "The choice is yours, Mr. Mercer," the thing said, its voice now a chorus of hundreds. "Ring the bell, turn the key, or watch as we consume this place and everyone in it, inch by agonizing inch, until someone else completes what you refused." The shadow continued its inexorable spread across the walls and ceiling, gradually encircling me in a shrinking pocket of dim red light. From within the darkness, faces began to form, contorted in eternal screams, eyes wide with endless terror. I backed against the desk, searching desperately for anything that might help. My hand brushed against the forgotten radio. Though it had been useless after 2 a.m., I grabbed it anyway, switching it on out of pure desperation. To my shock, it crackled to life. "Mercer, come in." "Mercer, are you there? This is Rodriguez. Emergency override engaged. Respond if you can hear me." The real Rodriguez's voice, tinny through the small speaker, cut through the encroaching darkness like a physical force. The shadow recoiled slightly, the faces within it contorting with what might have been pain. "Rodriguez," I gasped into the radio. "Block 15 is open. Something's trying to get me to use a key on the lock under the warden's bell. Don't touch that key." The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. "Whatever you do, don't open that lock. It's a binding mechanism, not a door. As long as it remains locked, the primary containment holds." The entity wearing Rodriguez's face snarled, its features finally slipping to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath the human disguise. "Give me the key," it demanded, its voice a discordant cacophony of overlapping sounds. "Give me the key." "I don't have it," I replied, backing further away. "You do." The creature looked down at the key in its hand, momentarily confused. In that instant of distraction, the radio crackled again. "Mercer, listen carefully," Rodriguez said. "Check your watch. What time is it?" I glanced at my wrist. 4:29 a.m. 4:29, I reported. "Good. The protocol states that in case of a code black in Block 15, emergency termination procedures can be initiated at exactly 4:30 a.m. This supersedes all other rules. You need to ring the warden's bell backward. 3 rings, pause, 2 rings, pause, 1 ring. This will trigger the secondary containment protocol." The shadow entity surged forward, engulfing the bell before I could reach it. "He's lying," it hissed, its voice now coming from everywhere at once. "The backward sequence releases the binding, it doesn't strengthen it." My watch ticked over to 4:30 a.m. I had to make a choice. The bell, shrouded in living darkness, its brass surface barely visible through the writhing shadow, but still there, still accessible. I lunged forward, arm extended through the amorphous blackness. The cold was immediate and penetrating, like plunging my limb into Arctic waters. Faces formed around my flesh, biting with teeth made of pure cold, whispering promises and threats directly into my mind. "Ring it forward. Turn the key. Set us free. We'll make you one of us. No more pain. No more fear. Forever. Refuse, and we'll peel your consciousness layer by layer for eternity." My fingers closed around the bell's rope. The shadow entity roared, a sound like 1,000 prison doors slamming shut simultaneously, and solidified around my arm, crushing with impossible pressure. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. "Now, Mercer!" The backward sequence exclamation marked pain blinded me as something in my arm snapped, but I managed to pull the rope once, twice, 3 times in succession. I paused, gasping through gritted teeth, then pulled twice more. Another pause, agony threatening to overwhelm my consciousness, then one final desperate pull. 3-2-1. The bell's tone was different now, deeper, resonating at a frequency that made my bones vibrate and my vision blur. The shadow entity released my arm, recoiling from the sound as if physically wounded. "No!" it shrieked, its Rodriguez disguise falling away completely to reveal a writhing mass of darkness, punctuated by too many eyes, too many mouths. "You don't know what you've done!" A mechanical grinding sound came from beneath the bell, metal components shifting against one another like a massive lock being engaged. The keyhole cover slid shut with a definitive click. The entity wearing Rodriguez's face dissolved into smoke, pouring itself toward the ventilation shaft with desperate speed. All throughout the prison, alarms began to sound, not modern electronic alerts, but old-fashioned mechanical bells that hadn't been used in decades, all ringing in the same 3-2-1 pattern I'd just created. On the surveillance monitors, which had unexpectedly flickered back to life, I watched the assembled entities flee in all directions. their earlier coordinated movement replaced by panicked, chaotic flight. The darkness that had spilled from Block 15 was receding, pulled back through the doorway as if by an immense vacuum. The faceless warden stood alone in the corridor, still holding its key, watching as its followers abandoned it. It turned slowly to face Camera 14, its blank visage somehow conveying intense hatred, despite the absence of features. It raised one hand, pointing directly at the camera, at me, before being violently yanked backward into Block 15 by unseen forces. The massive door to death row swung shut with terminal finality, metal screeching against stone. When it closed, a blinding flash of blue-white light erupted from around its frame, so intense that the camera temporarily overloaded, the screen going white before returning to its normal view of the now sealed entrance. "Mercer?" "Come in, Mercer." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio, tinged with both urgency and hope. "I'm here," I managed, cradling my injured arm against my chest. The door closed. There was some kind of energy discharge. The containment seal reactivating, Rodriguez explained, audibly relieved. "You did it. You stopped a full breach." "What was that thing? What's behind Block 15? A long pause. "That's a conversation for when you're safely out of there. How's your arm?" "Broken, I think, but I'll live." "Listen carefully," Rodriguez said, his tone becoming formal. "Emergency Protocol Override Sierra Echo 9 is now in effect. This authorizes you to leave the guard station before 5 a.m. and exit the facility directly. Use the emergency exit at the end of cell block 5, opposite the guard station. The code is 1913. I hesitated, eyeing the exit he'd indicated. After everything that had happened, I was reluctant to leave the relative safety of the guard station. "It's safe now," Rodriguez assured me, as if reading my thoughts. "The containment is secure, and the backward bell sequence initiated the purge protocol. Eastern State will be quiet until sunrise, but you need medical attention for that arm." He was right. The pain was intensifying, and I could see unnatural bruising spreading beneath my skin where the shadow entity had gripped me. Deep black marks that followed my veins like ink injected into the bloodstream. I gathered my few belongings with my good arm and approached the guard station door. It swung open easily, revealing an empty corridor illuminated by the dim emergency lighting. The air felt different, cleaner somehow, as if a miasma I hadn't consciously registered had been cleared away. As Rodriguez had promised, I encountered no entities during my careful journey to the emergency exit. The prison felt empty in a way it hadn't before, not just unoccupied, but genuinely vacant, as if whatever had been haunting it had retreated to some deeper layer of reality. The exit door required a 4-digit code on a keypad that looked surprisingly modern compared to the prison's otherwise antiquated infrastructure. I punched in 1913, the year they'd discovered the chamber beneath Block 15, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Cool pre-dawn air rushed in as I stepped outside onto a small, elevated platform with metal stairs leading down to Fairmount Avenue. The city looked surreal after my night inside Eastern State. The streetlights too bright, the occasional passing car too loud and colorful. Normal life continuing, oblivious to what existed behind the prison's massive walls. A black SUV with tinted windows idled at the curb. The driver's window lowered to reveal Rodriguez. The real Rodriguez, looking exactly as he had during orientation, though his expression was grim. "Get in," he said simply. "We need to get that arm treated before the corruption spreads." Corruption? I thought. looking again at the black lines spreading through my veins. But exhaustion and pain overwhelmed my curiosity, and I climbed into the vehicle without protest. As we pulled away from Eastern State, I glanced back at the imposing structure. In the growing light of dawn, it looked almost innocent. Just an old, abandoned prison repurposed as a tourist attraction. But I knew better now. I had seen what stirred within its walls after the arbitrary threshold of 2 a.m. "What happens now?" I asked as we merged into Philadelphia's early morning traffic. Rodriguez glanced at my injured arm, his expression unreadable. "Now? Now you become a full member of the Night Watch. No more orientation, no more tests. You've seen what's at stake." "The thing in Block 15, what is it?" "Something that was here long before the prison was built. Something the original architects discovered when digging the foundation and attempted to contain rather than destroy." He paused at a red light, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Something that's been trying to get out ever since. Am the night guards. We're what? Its jailers?" "Its wardens," Rodriguez corrected. "Just as the prison once had human wardens to oversee human prisoners." The light turned green, and we continued through the awakening city. "You have a choice to make, Mercer," Rodriguez continued after a long silence. "Few guards experience a Block 15 event on their first night. Those who do, it changes them, marks them." He nodded toward my increasingly discolored arm. "You can walk away. We'll treat your injury, provide generous compensation, ensure your silence. Or you can continue with the Night Watch, with full knowledge of what you're guarding against." "Do people actually choose to walk away?" After seeing that, Rodriguez's laugh was hollow. "More often than you'd think. The human mind is remarkably good at rationalization. In a week, you could convince yourself it was all a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. In a month, it might seem like nothing more than a strange dream. And if I stay, then you'll learn the full protocol, all the rules, not just the basic 13. You'll understand what's really contained within Eastern State's walls and why we can never, under any circumstances, allow it to escape." His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "And you'll carry that knowledge with you always, knowing that if you fail, if any of us fail, what emerges won't stop at Philadelphia." Through the windshield, I could see the sun beginning to rise over the city skyline, painting the buildings in hues of gold and amber. The first light of a new day, chasing away the lingering shadows of night. Except for the shadows spreading through my veins, those seemed impervious to the dawn. I thought about the faceless warden pointing at me before being dragged back into Block 15. About the thing wearing Rodriguez's face, promising eternal torment if I refused its demands. About the procession of entities, former inmates, guards, and visitors, all prostrating themselves before whatever dwelled in the chamber beneath death row. I also thought about the rules, the precise, detailed protocols that had kept that thing contained for nearly 2 centuries. The bell sequence that had resealed its prison when it had nearly escaped. "I'll stay," I said, the black lines now reaching my shoulder. "I want to understand. I need to understand." Rodriguez nodded, unsurprised. "Then your real training begins tomorrow night. For now, we need to address that corruption before it reaches your heart." He pulled into the underground parking garage of a nondescript building in Center City. "Our medical team has experience with this particular infection." As we walked toward an unmarked elevator, I glanced at my watch, 5:47 a.m. The night watch was officially over, the regular protocols suspended until sunset. But I knew now that the rules didn't end with daylight. They merely changed form, adapting to the shifting boundary between ordinary reality and whatever lay behind the walls of the Eastern State Penitentiary. The night watch continued, even in daylight. And I was now irrevocably part of it. The medical facility beneath the anonymous office building bore no resemblance to a regular hospital. The walls were lined with symbols similar to those I'd glimpsed in Eastern State. A combination of mathematical formulas, alchemical signs, and what looked like cuneiform script. The medical staff wore not scrubs, but dark gray uniforms with insignias I didn't recognize. They worked on my arm with practiced efficiency, injecting a blue glowing fluid directly into the black veins spreading from my injury. The substance burned like liquid nitrogen as it traveled through my circulatory system, systematically erasing the corruption left by the shadow entity's touch. Throughout the procedure, Rodriguez stood nearby, observing with clinical detachment. When the staff finally finished, leaving my arm bandaged and the corruption neutralized, he approached with a tablet computer. "You said you wanted to understand," he said, offering me the device. "This is the full history of Eastern State's Night Watch protocol, a history that began long before the prison was built." The tablet contained a trove of documents dating back to the early 1800s. Geological surveys, architectural plans, personal journals, and official records that had been deliberately excluded from public archives. As I scrolled through them, a disturbing narrative emerged. Before Eastern State Penitentiary, the land had been the site of an unusual geological formation, a perfect circular depression that local Native American tribes had considered taboo for centuries. European settlers had avoided it as well, until Philadelphia's expansion made the land too valuable to ignore. In 1821, during preliminary excavation for the prison's foundation, workers discovered an underground chamber approximately 100 feet below the surface. The chamber wasn't natural. Its walls were lined with a black, glass-like substance inscribed with symbols in no known language. At its center stood a massive stone obelisk covered in similar markings. Initial explorations ended in tragedy when several workers reported hearing voices from within the obelisk. One worker, convinced the voices belonged to his recently deceased wife, attacked the structure with a pickaxe. The resulting crack released what surviving accounts described as a darkness that moved with purpose. 3 workers died immediately, their bodies found drained of all fluid. 7 more disappeared entirely. The foreman who escaped described the darkness forming human-adjacent shapes that spoke with the voices of dead loved ones. Construction was halted until architect John Haviland proposed a radical solution: build the prison directly above the chamber, incorporating elements that would contain whatever had been released. The design, famously attributed to Haviland's interest in reforming architecture, a radial layout with cell blocks extending from a central hub, was actually a massive containment seal, with each cell block positioned according to astronomical alignments that reinforced the prison's supernatural barriers. Eastern State wasn't built to contain criminals, Rodriguez explained as I digested this information. It was built to contain something that predates humanity. The criminals were incidental, though their suffering and isolation over generations inadvertently strengthened the containment through a form of psychic reinforcement. "The separate system," I murmured, recalling the prison's infamous approach to incarceration. Complete isolation wasn't about rehabilitation. It was about generating sustainable suffering to feed the containment seal. Rodriguez nodded. A morally reprehensible, but effectively designed system. The isolation drove many inmates to madness, which created a specific energetic signature that reinforced the barriers around the chamber. And after the prison closed in 1971, that's when the Night Watch protocol became essential. Without the constant influx of suffering from inmates, the seals began to weaken. We established a skeleton crew of guards who understood the real purpose of Eastern State, to maintain the containment through ritual observance of specific protocols. I scrolled through more recent documents detailing various breaches and near catastrophes over the decades. The most serious incident had occurred in 1994, when the prison was being converted into a museum. A well-meaning historical preservationist had unwittingly removed several key architectural elements that formed part of the containment system. The resulting partial breach had killed 14 people before the Night Watch could re-establish control. The rules, I said, returning to the tablet's home screen. They're not just procedures. They're part of the containment itself. Exactly. The protocols actively reinforce the barriers through sympathetic magic. The bell at 2 a.m., the ban on acknowledging certain entities, the restricted areas. Each rule maintains a specific aspect of the containment seal. And when rules are broken, Rodriguez's expression darkened. Small infractions weaken the barriers temporarily. Major violations, like what nearly happened tonight with Block 15, can create permanent breaches. He took the tablet back, tapping through to a classified file. This is what emerged during the 1994 incident. Only partial manifestation, thankfully. The image showed what I initially thought was an abstract sculpture. A confusion of geometrically impossible angles and surfaces that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Then I realized it was a photograph of something partially emerged from a tear in reality. Something with too many dimensions trying to squeeze into our three-dimensional space. "What is it?" I asked, looking away from the disturbing image. "We don't know its true nature. The original records call it the occupant, or sometimes the waiting one. The native tribes who avoided the land referred to it as the hunger between stars." Rodriguez closed the file. "What we do know is that it communicates through mimicry and manipulation, using the voices and faces of those we know to try to convince us to break the containment. Like the entity impersonating Rodriguez, using my trust to try to trick me into turning the key." The thought sent a fresh chill through me despite the medical facility's warmth. "The corruption in your arm," Rodriguez continued, "was the beginning of assimilation. If left untreated, it would have eventually transformed you into one of its proxies, like the faceless warden or the other entities you encountered." I flexed my fingers, relieved to find them responding normally despite the lingering pain. "And now? Am I cured?" "The physical corruption has been neutralized, yes, but exposure to the occupant leaves other marks, psychological, spiritual. You'll need to be monitored for potential delayed effects." A doctor approached with discharge papers, which I signed with my uninjured hand. As I prepared to leave, Rodriguez handed me a small brass key on a steel chain. "This is your Night Watch token. It identifies you as a full member of the protocol team and grants access to restricted documentation." He hesitated, then added, "It also serves as protection against certain influences. Keep it with you at all times, especially when sleeping." I slipped the chain around my neck, the key surprisingly warm against my skin. "When do I return to Eastern State?" "Tonight. The containment needs to be reinforced after a breach of this magnitude. All available watch members will participate in the restoration ritual at midnight." He checked his watch. "Get some rest if you can. You'll need it." Outside, Philadelphia had fully awakened, the morning sun illuminating a city completely unaware of what had nearly escaped into its midst during the night. Traffic moved along Fairmount Avenue past Eastern State's imposing walls. Pedestrians hurried to work, and tourists gathered for the day's first prison tours. Business as usual, with no indication that reality itself had almost been torn apart by something ancient and hungry, trying to claw its way through from... where? Another dimension? The space between stars? Some primordial layer of existence that predated our universe? I touched the key hanging around my neck, its warmth pulsing slightly like a tiny heartbeat. My arm ached where the shadow entity had gripped it, the flesh still tender despite the medical treatment. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the faceless warden pointing at me before being dragged back into Block 15, a gesture that felt like a promise rather than a threat. "I'll be waiting," it seemed to say. "We have all the time in eternity." Eastern State Penitentiary loomed in the distance, its Gothic architecture starkly outlined against the morning sky. From the outside, it looked solid, impenetrable, its massive walls designed to keep dangerous offenders safely contained. But now I knew the truth. The walls weren't keeping anything in. They were keeping something out, containing a breach into somewhere else, a portal that had been discovered by accident and imperfectly sealed through desperate improvisation. And tonight, I would return to those walls as a full member of the Night Watch, to follow the rules that maintained reality itself, to stand guard not over a prison, but over the thin membrane separating our world from whatever waited hungrily on the other side. The protocol would continue, the watch would be maintained, and somewhere beneath Block 15, in a chamber lined with glass-like black stone, the occupant would continue waiting for its chance to emerge, for another guard to break the rules, for another opportunity to turn the key and open the lock beneath the warden's bell. Waiting, as it had for centuries, with the infinite patience of something that didn't experience time as we understood it. Waiting for me. I've been a Night Watch member at Eastern State for 6 months now. 6 months of graveyard shifts spent following protocols that keep reality intact. 6 months of witnessing things no human mind was designed to comprehend. 6 months of learning rules that grow increasingly specific and Byzantine as one advances through the watch hierarchy. Most nights are routine. Ring the bell at 2 a.m., log anomalies on the surveillance system, avoid acknowledgement of the various entities that manifest throughout the prison. Simple tasks with existential consequences. But some nights, like tonight, are different. Tonight is the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when the barrier between our world and whatever exists beyond Block 15 grows exceptionally thin. The full Night Watch contingent has been mobilized, all 12 current members stationed strategically throughout Eastern State's sprawling complex, maintaining a ritual formation that reinforces the containment seals. I'm assigned to the guard station in cell block 5, the same position I held during my first night. Rodriguez is in block 12, while Senior Watch Officer Lambert coordinates from the central hub. The remaining 9 members are positioned according to calculations that correspond to astronomical alignments I still don't fully understand. At 1:59 a.m., Lambert's voice crackles over the radio. Prepare for solstice protocol. Bell's sequence on my mark. I position myself beside the warden's bell, watch second hand sweeping toward the top of the hour. The surveillance monitors show my fellow watch members similarly poised at bells throughout the complex. Mark. I pull the rope 3 times, the familiar deep tone resonating through the prison. As always, the sound seems to penetrate deeper than mere acoustics should allow, vibrating through stone and flesh alike. On the monitors, the others perform identical actions, creating a harmonized toll that builds upon itself, growing more powerful with each synchronized ring. Through the speakers, the bell's tone begins to shift into something more complex. Not a single note, but a chord composed of impossible harmonics. The effect is immediate. Throughout Eastern State, the ambient temperature drops 20 degrees. The surveillance feeds show frost forming on cell bars and walls, spreading outward from Block 15 in complex fractal patterns. The entire prison groans as if under immense pressure, the stone walls themselves seeming to flex inward. Phase 1 complete, Lambert announces. Prepare for visualization. This is the part I still struggle with. The mental discipline required to participate in the collective visualization that reinforces the containment. According to Lambert, the process utilizes the same principle that made Eastern State's original separate system so effective at strengthening the barriers. Focused human consciousness directed toward a single purpose. I close my eyes as trained, forcing my mind to construct the specific geometric pattern detailed in the advanced protocols. A perfect dodecahedron with each face inscribed with symbols from the chamber walls, rotating clockwise while its internal angles simultaneously fold inward. A four-dimensional construct that's nearly impossible to hold in three-dimensional human consciousness. My temples throb with the effort, a familiar warmth trickling from my nose, indicating another nosebleed, common side effect of the visualization process. On the worst nights, watch members have been known to rupture blood vessels in their eyes or suffer minor aneurysms from the mental strain. Maintain visualization, Lambert intones over the radio, his voice strained. Phase 2, approaching critical threshold. Through my closed eyelids, I sense a change in the lighting, a subtle darkening that has nothing to do with the physical illumination in the guard station. The air grows thick and resistant, as if reality itself is congealing around me. Then I hear it, a voice cutting through both radio static and mental discipline. My brother's voice, though I have no brother. They're lying to you, it whispers directly into my consciousness. The containment doesn't protect humanity, it imprisons it. My visualization wavers, the geometric construct threatening to collapse under this intrusion. I've been trained for this. The occupant often attempts to disrupt the Solstice Protocol by targeting individual watch members with personalized distractions. Subject experiencing attempted interference. I report through gritted teeth, forcing the mental construct back into proper alignment. Maintaining visualization. Acknowledged, Lambert responds. Block 15 showing increased activity. All personnel strengthen barriers. I redouble my focus, ignoring the voice as it grows more insistent, more familiar. It shifts from my non-existent brother to the tone of my father, then my college roommate, cycling through relationships both real and fabricated, searching for emotional leverage. On the surveillance monitors, which I can perceive peripherally even through closed eyes, Block 15 is visibly distorting, the stone walls bulging inward as if under enormous pressure from outside, the air around the sealed doors shimmering like heat waves, despite the freezing temperature. Phase 2 holding, Lambert announces. Prepare for harmonic convergence. I remove one hand from the bell rope, reaching for the brass key hanging around my neck. The night watch token I received after my first encounter with the occupant. The metal burns cold against my palm as I grip it, using the physical sensation to anchor myself against the escalating mental pressure. All around Eastern State, my fellow watch members are doing the same, creating a synchronized circuit of focus and intention. The keys aren't merely symbolic. They're fragments of an ancient mechanism, pieces of the original lock that sealed the chamber beneath Block 15. Convergence in 3, 2, 1. Initiate. I slammed the key against the bell, creating a sharp, discordant note that shouldn't be possible from such an instrument. The sound pierces through the conventional auditory spectrum, resonating at frequencies that human ears cannot typically detect, but human minds can somehow perceive. The effect is immediate and violent. The air in the guard station crystallizes momentarily, frost patterns forming and dissolving in milliseconds. The surveillance monitors show similar phenomena throughout the prison, reality itself briefly transforming into something solid and brittle before returning to normal. In Block 15, the distortion reaches its peak. The bulging walls snap back into place with such force that small fragments of stone explode outward like shrapnel. The shimmer intensifies to blinding brightness, then collapses inward like water down a drain. Containment reinforced, Lambert announces, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Solstice protocol complete. All watch members report status. One by one, my colleagues check in, each sounding as drained as I feel. When my turn comes, I manage a hoarse, Block 5 secure, before slumping into the chair, utterly depleted. The visualization process draws directly on mental energy in ways modern science can't explain, but the original architects of Eastern State somehow understood intuitively. Some ancient knowledge of psychic architecture, perhaps, or wisdom gleaned from a chamber itself during those early explorations. As normal lighting and temperature gradually returned to the prison, I observe the aftermath on the surveillance feeds. Frost recedes from the cell bars, leaving behind intricate patterns like fossil impressions. The pressure-induced distortions in the stonework smooth themselves out, the ancient building seemingly healing itself. But in Block 15, something has changed. The door to death row, massive, reinforced, sealed with both physical and metaphysical locks, now bears a new mark. A handprint pressed into solid steel, as if the metal had briefly been as malleable as clay. A perfect impression of my right hand. All watch members report to the central hub for debriefing, Lambert orders, his tone suggesting he's noticed this anomaly as well. Full containment assessment protocols in effect. I stare at that impossible handprint, knowing with absolute certainty that I never left the guard station, never approached Block 15 during the solstice ritual. Yet there it is, my handprint, down to the small scar across my palm from a childhood accident. The truth hits with terrifying clarity. During the visualization, when consciousness partially detaches from physical constraints, some part of me had reached toward Block 15. Some fragment of my being had touched the barrier, leaving a mark that shouldn't be possible. Or perhaps something on the other side had reached through me, using my mental connection to the containment process as a conduit. As I prepare to leave the guard station for debriefing, the surveillance feed from Block 15 briefly distorts. For just a moment, so quickly I might have imagined it, the camera shows not the empty corridor with its marked door, but a black chamber lined with glass-like stone and a central obelisk covered in alien symbols. At the base of the obelisk sits a figure in a night guard uniform, writing in a journal. The figure looks up at the camera and smiles with my face. Not quite my face, but close. A version of me with eyes that reflect nothing. A version of me with too many teeth arranged in concentric circles. The image vanishes as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the normal view of Block 15's sealed door with its handprint impression. But the message is clear. The occupant has found a connection to me, just as it eventually does with all Night Watch members who survive their first encounter. This is why the turnover rate is so high. This is why Rodriguez couldn't meet my eyes when he handed me the key 6 months ago. He knew what awaited me, not immediate danger, but a gradual, insidious link to whatever waits beneath the Eastern State Penitentiary. I checked my watch. 3:13 a.m. Hours remain before dawn, before the prison returns to its daytime masquerade as a mere historical attraction. Hours during which the occupant will continue testing the boundaries, probing for weaknesses, using my inadvertent connection to push against the barriers with renewed purpose. The rules have protected Eastern State for nearly 2 centuries. The protocols have contained what lies beneath Block 15, preventing it from fully emerging into our reality. The Night Watch has maintained vigil through generations of guards, each eventually broken or corrupted by prolonged exposure to the occupant's influence. Now it's my turn to face what all Night Watch members eventually confront: the knowledge that in guarding against the breach, I have become the breach. That the rules protecting our world from the occupant are also increasingly rules protecting our world from me. As I leave the guard station for debriefing, the warden's bell tolls once more of its own accord, a single perfect note that follows me down the corridor, like a promise or a claim. The handprint on Block 15's door pulses slightly in synchronization with my heartbeat, a connection I can feel across the physical distance separating us, a connection that will only grow stronger with time. I still have the night shift at Eastern State Penitentiary. I still follow the rules after 2 a.m., but increasingly, I understand why.